Welcome to the Australian War History Podcast. This is your co-host, Adam. We're excited to bring to you the start of Neil Davis's story. I won't do an introduction because Wayne will take care of that one later on. Wayne has also released a new book, which is a memoir called Around the Blue Laminex Table, which deals with the events and people Wayne met whilst growing up in Kalgoorlie, a mining town in Western Australia. Uncle Jack from the Timor series is featured quite prominently in this book, so if you're interested, please go to the details below to find out some more information about it. And we've released the video of this podcast recording to our Patreon members. A quick shout out to Stephen Mullett for his support on Patreon. And if you would like to check out that particular page, it is Patreon, so patreon.com/Oz War History, so AUS War History. And we've also got a Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Oz War History. And thank you for all your support. It is greatly appreciated. And I really hope you enjoy this podcast. Bye.
Welcome back. This is going to be about Vietnam again, but in a different sense. There's a famous Australian photojournalist that you want to talk about not only Vietnam, but his beginning life and why that's important for setting him up in Vietnam. So do you want to take it away?
So back on the horse again, so to speak. So it's been quite a while since our last one, and you've had quite a few things that go on, a work promotion, and Georgia, that magnificent daughter of yours, and there's another
one on the way.
Adam and Ashley production underway.
Exactly. So we're going to have a boy. So 24th of May should be the delivery date.
Right. Yeah.
All goes well. All goes to plan. Sometimes it doesn't always happen. So
So as Adam mentioned, this one is on Neil Davis, and I was trying to find a kind of a nice little description or a title, and I called it The Road Less Travelled By, and I'll explain that shortly. It's an incredible life. He's short, if we consider, the old 70 years, 70, short in his 50s. He crammed a lot into his life, and we're just capturing the first one. We're just capturing the early life in Australia. There's a lot of stuff there that I thought, oh dear, should I mention this? And I thought, yes, we should, because it helps us to understand what happens to him later in Vietnam. Where some things happen and we say, but really kind of you can see it happening back in Australia, so we shouldn't be surprised. But he's probably famous for. He's one of the enduring icons of the Vietnam War. He's probably famous for that momentous footage of the North Vietnamese T-54 tank, which is numbered 834, crashing through the South Vietnamese presidential palace gates on April the 30th, 1975. That's probably the most important thing, but also there's a highly creditable 1980 award-winning documentary called Frontline that details all of his achievements. So there's a couple of things here that really stand out. Back to that road less travelled by idea. I was trying to find, like I said, a neat little summary of his life, and like advertisers do when they're trying to sell a product. And I was thinking there for quite a while, and kind of the older you get, the more the brain doesn't want to function too well. But it took a while to kind of arrive at this. But I thought back to a famous Robert Frost poem. It's called "The Road Not Taken." The last couple of lines in the poem, it was very, very relevant, and the last two lines read, "Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less travelled by, and that has made all the difference." So back to Davis, he had to make a decision, kind of 63, 64. Does he stay in Tasmania, or does he go to Southeast Asia? And he made the big decision to take the road less travelled by, and a road fraught with uncertainty and darkness. So, but enormous triumphs as well, and we've just got to say, thank goodness he did, because it's an extraordinary tale. And it could have been very different. Could have just been a pedestrian, banal story that kind of talks about a bloke that was a good photographer and, and he achieved a certain modicum of success in Tasmania, but not the stuff that comes out of Vietnam. So it's kind of, I think that captures, the road less travelled by.
Considering the guy, I think it's a fairly apt.
It is, he was always a man that he marched to his own tune all the time, and I mean, and you look around, all the accolades being thrown at Shane Warne, he was the same, he was totally unique. I mean, use that word unique in the real sense of how it should, and no one before, no one since, and he marched to his own tune, and the Mick Jaggers and the Michael Jacksons of the world loved him, for the bloke he was.
Yeah.
And it's the same with Davis. He just absolutely a one-off,
Yeah.
So, but if you do really want to kind of pursue, look at Neil Davis in more depth, you really probably need to read a book by Tim Bowden. It's called One Crowded Hour. And the book's title is taken from a poem by a Thomas Mordaunt, born 1730, died in 1809, and he fought in the 7 Years' War of 1756 to 1763. And the significant lines of the poem are, one crowded hour of glorious life is worth an age without a name. And Davis, I mean, that was a beautiful title, I thought. The Davis filled his life with kind of gusto and danger and extraordinary achievements. Was a crowded hour of a magnificent life, glorious life.
Yeah.
It's a great read. And if you really want a serious, in-depth examination of his life, read it.
I'll link the book.
It's a fantastic read, and he's a great journalist, Tim Bowden, one of our best, and he interviewed him at length, and so that's a really in-depth look. This is kind of a good look if you really are interested. You need to dip into it. So Davis, where did it all begin? Inauspicious beginnings in a town called Sorrel in Tasmania, and then from there to a titan on the world stage as a talented cameraman and journalist reporting on the Vietnam War and other conflicts as well after that. But he seemed, why I like him so much is he captures all the quintessential Australian qualities in a man. He kind of, he had that daredevil swashbuckling charm that blokes and women love. He was a lady killer. I mean, the women just fell over. He was a good-looking bloke, tall, 6 foot, 183 centimetres, and the women just adored him. And he treated them with respect. Later on we'll talk about kind of various things to do with these women that just fell over in adoration, And he wasn't that kind of a lady killer in the sense of, he treated them meanly. He treated them really respectfully, and a lot of the females that he didn't kind of pursue, they didn't hate him. They were kind of mates with him. They loved what they lived with him, So there's no nastiness there at all. At all. But he was a gambler, and he had that amazing cool detachment under extreme battle conditions. Most men, fall apart under the terrible stresses of battle, and he didn't. He just took it in his stride, and legendary cool and calm. He was a cool hand Luke, so to speak.
But it's like I imagine most people wouldn't be able to even shoot a gun, and yet he's trying to frame a picture.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Take a good photo.
Yes.
So you couldn't do it without being cool, calm, and collected.
No, that's right. I mean, there's bullets flying around his ears, and some people thought that he had a death wish, and he said no, not at all. He said, I was never going to die. I was going to live through all of this Vietnam stuff, and he did. And I couldn't help but thinking it once again. Shane Warne, a couple of his the test battles that he figured in, or matches he figured in. There was one there that it looked as though it was going to be a draw, And the Australians had thought, oh, we'll just, bat out the last day and it'll be a draw. But he went in and he said, no, we're going to win this. We're going to win this test match. And he bowled, three of the most important batsmen over very quickly. And all of a sudden, victory they could sense it.
Yeah.
And Shane Warne was the bloke that did it.
Yeah.
All the rest of the team was saying,
no, it's over.
We'll just bat it out.
Yeah.
And Davis was the same, he just believed that he was going to win through. And I was just looking at kind of quality of cool, calm, collected. We seem to kind of throw up these amazing characters, Australians, and in wartime situations. And I couldn't help but thinking of the magical magnetism and charisma that was around Keith Miller, one of the greatest all-rounders in the field of Test cricket. He was part of the 948 Invincibles. He played with Bradman, and he was just a superb all-rounder. They think probably the best all-rounder in the world. He was a powerful striker of the ball, great batsman, almost acrobatic in slips. Some of his catches were just extraordinary. He was a fierce opening fast bowler. So, what a package. And there weren't not too many people like him. Dawson, all-rounder, great bowler, great batsman, but they're a rare breed, and Keith Miller was part of it. And it was funny. He was asked to explain how he managed to take 7 wickets for 12 runs. That's an amazing feat. And he said, there's 3 reasons. He said, first, I bowled pretty well. Second, second, and there was a bit of a pause. And he said, you can forget about the other 2 reasons. so he was he kind of had a good sense of humour as well.
Good character. Yeah.
Keith Miller was once again a tall, talented footballer like Davis was. He played for St Kilda, and he miraculously cheated death, as Davis did in some of these situations. Once, apparently, there was a mechanical problem with a bow fighter, because he was a fighter with the Royal Air Force, the RAF, in World War II. Problems with the bow fighter forced him to make an emergency landing, and on his next flight, after it had been repaired, the problem reoccurred, and the new pilot was killed. On another occasion, he avoided colliding with a hangar by centimetres, and then sometime later, escaped death by skipping a social engagement where a V1 bomb hit the venue and killed many of the patrons. We had, sorry, you were saying something? Luck. Yeah, superb. Yeah. And that's the case in war. Some men, they're kind of the first hour of battle, they're dead, and some men survive, 5 years fighting, and who decides that? It's, in the lap of the gods, isn't it?
Yeah.
And this V1 bombers there was a V1 and a V2 bomber that were kind of set against the British in World War II. The V1 was a doodle bug, and they could be actually shot out of the sky. You could see they'd be shot. Quite a few of them were shot towards London. The 1,400 doodle bugs or V1 bombers hit London. They were powered by a motor, and when they reached a certain point, they were programmed. The motor just cut out, and you could see them dropping into London, and they caused great havoc. But pilots could shoot them out of the air. But the V2 bombers were different. They were moved at the speed of sound, so they were much more dangerous and caused widespread havoc when they kind of struck. Back to our mate Miller. He was a good looking bloke, and he had this larrikin spirit, just like Davis did. And he was a favourite with the English ladies. They you can imagine. Here he is, this daredevil pilot, good looking, devil may care attitude, next door to some of these, kind of bit stiff and wooden poms. I know I'm saying some very, very kind of politically incorrect stuff here, but who gives a damn? Sometimes you gotta.
Poms can deal with it.
No, of course they can. Yeah. This is World War II.
Yeah.
Things are different now.
Exactly.
But here's this bloke that's kind of, like got this light on him, this spotlight on him, and the women just adored him. And Michael Parkinson, he was a great interviewer of various important characters. He idolised Keith Miller. He said, Michael Parkinson said, we just looked at him and we thought, that's who I want to be. Good looking, a great cricketer, Yeah. And he was being interviewed, or Parkinson interviewed him, and he said, I suppose there's a lot of pressure being a cricketer and facing, speed bowlers at the crease. And Miller has replied, pressure. There's no pressure in Test cricket. Real pressure is when you're flying a mosquito with a Messerschmitt up your arse. It's a bit rested. But I mean, that's it. I mean, what they were doing sport was nothing.
Comparatively, yeah.
That's right,
yeah.
And same thing with Davis, numerous parallels. Okay, back to Davis full time. He was born in Hobart, Tasmania, 14th February 1935. Youngest of 4 children to Geoffrey and Marjorie Davis. He was raised on farms at Nala and Sorrel. He experienced tragedy at an early age of 10 when his mother died. That would have shaken him a fair bit. But I think probably just being introduced to death at an early age made him have an attitude to death that a lot of other people mightn't have had. I mean, he just saw it as a natural thing and not to get worried about and just to kind of let life unfold. And that was his attitude. And I think when it comes back to his mother dying when he was 10. And his aunt, Lillian Davis, he wrote many letters to her from about 64 onwards, kind of like assumed position of a surrogate mother. In fact, he actually said she became my mother by proxy. And he said when he was younger, he found it very strict and hard. But when he relocated to Vietnam, he kind of reconnected with her, and she was a very astute, thoughtful, intelligent lady. And she said to him, I want you to write me really detailed, insightful diaries and letters about the people you meet and the places you see in Vietnam. And so I think that was good for him because it allowed him to stand back from what he was going through and gain a sense of perspective. And so he kept up all of these letters to his aunt. In fact, I mentioned this kind of his mother's early passing. He actually said that I've always had a sympathy with country people, whether they were rice paddy farmers in the mountains. Their attitudes didn't differ much from the people who lived in and around Nala, where he was brought up. He said there's the same acceptance of life and death, the phenomenon of good and bad seasons, that feeling for the land that helped me a great deal, and I've never felt a stranger in Asian countries. In fact, he says, he recounts an incident when he was a small boy. He said he and his brother they found this body of an itinerant farmer who had died from natural causes or cold under a bush. And he said, once again, his mother dying and seeing this kind of itinerant farmer, he said, we regarded death as a natural thing like the birth of calves. He had a natural feeling for the outsider too as well, for the underdog, which is once again an Australian quality. We like that underdog to somehow come through, to win through, and those stories of redemption. I mean, all nations, all people like them, I know, but we seem to revel in those stories where people rise out of terrible difficulties and they make good out of it, And he said, when I was living in Cambodia in the early 1970s, I noticed that the Cambodians were very tolerant of people who would be considered crazy in Western society. He goes on, he says, in Cambodia, these people were always absorbed and cared for by their own district, and they survived and were obviously happier than they would have been in some kind of institution because they operated in familiar situations without fear. I mean, people who are a bit, we use that word crazy, a bit kind of politically incorrect and a bit loosely, but, those who are different and don't quite fit in, what do? We put them in we used to put them in institutions and away from people, and it doesn't always help them. I remember when I was teaching, we had an ed support group in the school, and I was quite surprised how they became part of the school community. They really mixed in, and and there was we didn't call them names or we didn't kind of ostracize them. And there was one boy called Liam. Look, I'm going to kind of try and mimic his speech to me, but he was a delightful kid. He called me Mr. Lamotte. Mr. Lamotte, that was his version, And he used to see me every Monday morning and he'd say, Mr. Lamotte, yeah, guess what I did on the weekend? I'd say, listen, I'm not sure, Liam, what'd you do? I mean, he told me this every Monday morning, so I knew exactly what he was going to say. But I said, no, look, what'd you do, Liam? He said, Mr. Lamotte, I had mushrooms on toast, and then I went horse riding. And I said, boy, that's amazing, Liam. But it wasn't amazing. I'd heard the story 300 times before.
Yeah.
But why am I mentioning this? Because he was part of the community, and he mixed with all kinds of people, and he probably told other people the same story. What he did. Mushrooms on toast and horse riding on the weekend. But it's the same thing. He was absorbed into the community, and so as a result of that, they kind of survived. And he said he believed country people had the same acceptance of those who fall into the category of odd or eccentric, And he talked about this character called Adam Featherstone back in his hometown, who was in his 60s, and he wandered around the neighbourhood with his head down, his hands clasped behind his back, like Prince Philip used to do, kind of hands behind his back. He never spoke, and he walked with long, loping strides, He never looked to the left or right. He just kind of looked ahead, One day, Davis was out with a friend, and they came across this policeman, Chilcott, and he was sitting on something on the path that they were walking on. And it turned out that the something was Adam Featherstone. Anyway, so what had happened, Davis says, what was more bizarre was that Adam had collapsed and died while apparently digging his own grave. There was a hoe and a shovel and the beginnings of the grave dug down to a depth of 9 inches, or about 22.5 centimetres. We believed at the time that he must have had a premonition of his own death. He must have got up from his bed about midnight and started to dig. As far as I know, Adam had not shown any signs of sickness, and I think the post-mortem showed he had died of a heart attack. Though country people are more prepared to accept the supernatural, there's kind of connection with things that aren't rational and aren't reasonable to the scientific mind, more so than city people. And, they're kind of just on that. I know a good mate of mine, Lyndon Humphrey from Kalgoorlie, he often talks about a character called Tommy Dawson, and he was a Down syndrome boy. And so once again, kind of very different. But he had a lot of mates in Cal, and he used to, ride around South Kalgoorlie on his bike, and so he fitted in with the community, and he was given a job. He was given a job, the local racecourse. He loved horses. He was given a job by this gentleman called Scobie Kingston, and so he had a life. He had, he was working, probably earning a bit, not a huge amount, grooming and preparing the horses for their races. But he had a very great gentleness of spirit. There's nothing nasty about him, and no one made fun of him. Lyndon said, look, unfortunately, he died at a young age. And he said, that's the case with Down syndrome children. They don't have long lives. And Lyndon met Tommy Dawson's sister many years later, and the sister explained things about him and the family, and Lyndon said it was great just to see the way that he was part of the family and part of the community,
Would have meant a lot.
Yeah.
So I remember my godmother's had a lady, she had Down syndrome, Elsie, and
yes, that's right.
She lived quite a long life, and because I think one of the reasons why is she got good care, but she was part of something.
Yes,
if you know what I mean. She was part of
the family.
Part of the family. She had tasks that she had to do.
Yes.
Every day, and my godmother being my godmother, if you didn't do them, she would always follow up. She could never be lazy. She always had tasks to do. She always had something to live for, if you know what I mean. And she was always very happy.
Yes.
And I think it's similar in that case. So bit of purpose.
Yeah. And I was trying to find an incident that somehow captured, back to Davis now, and I was reading about this, and it was a footy match. Once again, good, quintessentially Australian. And I think this kind of little incident captures him perfectly. Like I say, he was tall, athletic, he was known to be a very unreliable kicker of goal, of the footy, when he was dead in front. I don't know, it was too easy, So he was always missing goals that were dead in front. However, he was very good at acute angles. Now, who knows why? Maybe it was the danger. Maybe it was the sense of challenge, dead in front. It's easy. So, but Davis, the mentality, here's something that an average person couldn't do. And he was good at it. Yes. He was good at it. I mean, and these acute angles, most best full forwards would probably cringe and start perspiring. How am I going to kick this goal? I've got no chance. But he had this feeling, I can do it. And anyway, he took the screamer of a mark, and Davis was wasting time because his mate, Bill Kingston, he had a nickname called the Ferret, and you can kind of see why in a second. He was organising bets that, Billy was kind of saying, Davis is going to kick this goal, and I'm prepared to offer you this, and if you reckon he's not going to, put your money down. Put your money where your mouth is, So here's Davis kind of going through, pulling his socks up and grabbing some grass and throwing in the air to see whether or not you see where the wind's blowing, as all full forwards do when they're trying to waste time, praying and waving at the crowd and giving a thumbs up to all assembled, all the other players, because he loved an audience. He was at his best when people were looking at him, So here he is. He's got the ball, acute angle, and most people think he's got no chance of kind of putting it through, threading the ball through. Anyhow, he kicked this wobbly punt. It was a useless thing. And it looked as though it was going to miss. But all of a sudden, the wind drifted it across a goal. so anyway, so they won all this money. He and his mate, the Ferret, won all this money. And so, in fact, Davis said at the last second, a gust of wind blew it straight through the centre of the goals. Free beer tastes the best. So they won all this money. So what does this show about Davis? So, one, he was a gambler. He was all of his mates. Or his mate kind of organising bets to back him in. He was lucky. He certainly was. He kicked the ball and they had free beer for the night. He believed instinctively that he would win. And that comes through all the time in Vietnam. He just knew that he would survive Vietnam. He did. He was charismatic. He had centre of attention, and he loved it. And he loved to drink as well. At the end, the rewards were there. So, very Australian. Even though he was kind of not a very good kick in front of goals, he loved the game of football. And he actually said, I suppose I was considered the boy wonder. I was fast, and by the time I was 15 years old, I was 6 foot, 183 centimetres, tall but very lightly built. But he's given the job of number one ruckman. In fact, he played in the All-States Schoolboys Footy Carnival in Queensland, representing Tasmania. He was very talented, as long as he didn't have the kick. And then there was a bit of quite a major event in his life. He was conscripted into the Australian Army for 6 months of training, and he had 2 years in the CMF. So when I say the Australian Army, I kind of paused a bit. It was the Citizens Military Forces. That's what they were called back in those days. And he said of his time when he was in the CMF, he said it was tough training, right? But I enjoyed it because it gave me an insight into the military mind and what is expected of a soldier in a way of discipline. And I found it useful many years later when I went to Vietnam and Cambodia. He became incredibly fit. He loved physical fitness, and it was something that came through in Vietnam. He survived so many injuries that would knock over an ordinary bloke because he was so fit. He was, a regime of boxing and running and football in the army. And so when he finished his conscription, he thought, here's a chance. So he went out and got very drunk for a whole week. Not drunk for a day.
A week celebration.
A week celebration. Yeah. So, I mean, he was a very good drinker. Anyway, unfortunately, at the end of the full week, he contracted polio, which was a devastating disease back in the 50s and 60s. A lot of kids caught it, and they, some people died from it, and some people, they really never recovered from it. But Davis said, I was immediately struck and paralysed in the chest and in my upper legs. So he really was in a bad way. Most victims were unable to use the muscles in their chest, and they invariably died of asphyxiation or drowning in the fluid which collected in their lungs. And he found himself fighting for his life in an iron lung. We used to have an expression back in the 50s and 60s, he wouldn't work in an iron lung. What it means is that the iron lung was doing all of the work to keep a person alive. It was doing their breathing. And he described it, this iron lung. He said the whole thing was like a greatly oversized coffin. And you put your whole body, except your head and arms, into this awful thing. And he said it had rubber seals around your neck and arms, while a compressor pumped air in and out 16 times a minute. It made a dreadful sucking and hissing sound. And the frightening thing was you could hear this thing in the dark at night like a giant breathing. But psychologically, I always believed this. I was not only convinced that I wasn't going to die, but I would be out of that hospital in a short time. Here's this mental resilience. We use that word all the time, but that mental capacity. No, this is not going to knock me over. I'm going to win through with this. Luckily, he had an outstanding doctor, treated him. He was a Dr. Douglas Parker, and he was a pioneer in revolutionary treatment of people with polio. And he was also Tasmania's leading orthopedic surgeon, and he subscribed to an unusual principle or tenet, which said that patients should not be inactive in their recovery. In other words, they had to be very active. That was the way out of the serious disease polio, was that you didn't sit there in the iron lung and then later on do nothing. You had to be actively trying to get yourself out of this terrible situation. And it was very unorthodox thinking. Most at the time was still, the exact opposite, do nothing. But he had a nurse, Sister Kenny, who applied hot compressors to his joints to ease the pain and discomfort. And Davis actually said, every day we were taken swimming. I still had the power to grasp the bars in my hands, and the water exercises helped keep the muscles in my chest working. But he was so badly paralysed that he could not even sit up. So, I mean, here we are saying Davis is saying, I'm going to win through, but he could barely sit up. So the kind of...
It's pretty serious.
Oh, yeah, that's right, But he boasted to Dr. Parker that he would be out of hospital in 3 weeks. Davis continued by saying, I was determined to be. Dr. Parker was very encouraging, saying that if I did everything I was told and had that attitude, I'd be out. He told me later that he didn't really think I would get out. It was almost like, here's a good way of fobbing him off. Here's this idiot Davis who believes he's going to kind of come through this unscathed. How can we indulge him? Yeah, that's very good, Neil Davis. That's the way to do it. He didn't really believe it. But anyway, Davis continues, I felt swimming was helping me a lot. And it was the only exercise I could do anyway. So every night after lights, out at 9 p.m, I would haul my body along the floor of the ward because my legs weren't working properly, and somehow get down the steps into the pool to exercise a couple of extra hours. So here he's doing all this exercise, and then everybody else is sleeping. What does he do? He crawls along the corridors, does a couple of extra hours. Mental strength, capacity. It's just extraordinary, Yeah. So when we see what happens in Vietnam, you can kind of say, yeah, this makes sense.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. In fact, Dr. Douglas Parker later said, for goodness sake, just let him do it. Just make sure he doesn't drown, because psychologically it's good for him. So make sure he doesn't drown. But he's, And it helps him, but guess what? He's not going to get out of it. And Davis challenged himself to play footy in 4 months after he left hospital. And I think he did get out very soon after. I don't know whether it was 3 weeks. I couldn't find out whether it was 3 weeks, but it was not long after he was put inside hospital that he recovered, And he said, Davis says, Parker, that is, encouraged me in all this madness. Others said it was madness, and other doctors strongly disapproved. And after 4 months, after I came out of hospital, I did play hard, competitive football. Amazing, Thinking of dragging himself along the corridors, and 4 months later, he's playing hard, competitive football. It was very painful, but I firmly believed it was a good thing that it did hurt me. I suppose it's fair to say that beating polio was my first big challenge. If you look at life as a series of challenges, and it is for most people, I think you meet them by getting up and fighting. I believe in fighting on. Life is a battle anyway, so you've got to fight on, and after a while it becomes a habit. Well, it was very habitual for him, certainly.
Thank you for listening to that podcast. If you've made it all the way to the end, congratulations. And this is a split of a large episode, so we've split it into 2. The next one will follow up in a week or 2, which you can then listen to understand Neil Davis's beginning history, which then led into his success in the Vietnam War as a journalist. Thank you very much for listening, and I will catch you soon.